Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar on integrating ISO 27001 with the UK's privacy regulations. I'm Alan Calder. I'm your host for this afternoon. I've been in the world of information security and GDPR for something well in excess of 20 years. I led the first organization that was ever certified to the standard that has now become ISO 27001 around the world, and I've written books about information security. I've also been fairly extensively involved in the developments of GDPR practitioner and training activities around the UK and the EU, written a book around that. And so, of course, talking about the combination of ISO 27001 and GDPR in a single management system is something which now comes far more easily to me than 20 years ago I would ever have thought possible. IT Governance, the business I set up, has now more than 20 years experience and some 180 people, very deep expertise in our consultants, our trainers, our subject matter experts. We've got some 12,000 clients around the world and a very comprehensive offering of products and services around ISO 27001 and GDPR. And by GDPR, I mean UK or EU, depending on what it is that you need. Our expertise is at the core of how we deliver peace of mind to our customers. Some 1,300 organizations we've helped prepare and maintain ISO 27001 compliance, 15,000 or more delegates on our training courses. We do a lot of Cyber Essentials work, and we have now some pushing up towards 2,500 organizations using our governance, risk and compliance software with multiple accreditations in all sorts of different ways and forms. And of course, all of the experience that we get doing all of that kind of work is what finds its way into the services that we deliver to our customers. And our customers appreciate that we focus on quality. We have as a Net Promoter Score, we're almost at world class. Our Trustpilot score for many of the smaller tickets, products and services which we sell through our website tends to sit somewhere up in the excellent level. And it's that focus on quality and customer service that we hope is a key reason that clients keep coming back to us for us to build value around their information security and privacy activity. And as part of how we develop our relationship with the world, we have key relationships with certification bodies. While we are an implementation company and therefore can work with any certification body that a client chooses. Certification bodies, as you know, are independent of implementation. We have a particularly good relationship with Perry Johnson that we've done a number of projects with, where we've done the implementation work and they know us and they've done the certification work. So that kind of makes the process a lot easier for our clients. And so joining me today is Tom Wheat, who's the International Sales Manager at Perry Johnson here in the UK. Tom, can I let you talk a bit about yourself and PJR?
Of course. Thank you, Alan. It's much appreciated. As mentioned, thank you, Alan, for the introduction. Much appreciated. As mentioned, my name's Tom Wheat, and I head up the UK and European division for Perry Johnson Registrars. I think what's key to note the case of is that the name may be new to a few people in the UK, and quite simply, Perry Johnson Registrars is the biggest certification body in North America. We also have a global presence, and there's only 2 countries that we aren't active in. For I think what's key, what I mentioned before, is we work very closely alongside IT governance. And the reason for that most definitely is the majority, even if all of our auditors are trained on the platforms and templates and systems that Alan uses. And I suppose that all comes down to the customer. There's nothing worse, I'm sure, that we can all smile where you've done great work and the auditors requesting documentation that you've spent heavily on that's not to date. So I think what's key is that combined, obviously, approach is more importantly all the templates that are used we're very au fait with. So yes, I'm here with Alan today. Obviously, Alan is obviously the consultancy side, And I'm also here to answer any questions in regards as we move through this on the certification side for you guys. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Tom. And this slide really sums up that relationship. IT governance is an implementation expert, 20 odd years of expertise. PJR is a certification authority, 20 plus years of expertise in certification across the broad range of ISO standards. So today we're going to cover the intersection of ISO 27001 and the UK GDPR and have a brief look at how that can help organizations enhance data security and privacy compliance, and to do so cost effectively. We'll look at the role of the PIMS, which is not something you can drink. It's a privacy information management system. We'll have a brief look at some of the future privacy changes, some practical steps for integrating ISO 27001 with UK GDPR, and how CyberComply as a platform can help streamline and automate that process. You will have noticed that you're all on mute. That's designed to try and avoid background noise as people join the webinar, but we also recognize that you're likely to have questions as we go through the webinar. So please do, if you find that you have a question, please go to the GoToWebinar panel, which should be on the screen in front of you. There is a sliver on that called questions. If you click on that, you can type questions into that as and when you have a question, and then when we come to the end of the webinar, we've finished the kind of prepared section of it, we will then turn to questions. I'll share the question with everybody in the audience, and then either Tom or I, or both of us, will answer the question to the best of our ability. So that's kind of how we proceed. And for those of you who are already asking it, the slides look as though they're probably already available to you in the handout section of the webinar. There will be a recording of it available on our website in due course, but that's the plan for today. So talking about the intersection between ISO 27001 and UK GDPR, and the logical way to think about that is that cybersecurity and data protection really are just different sides of the same coin. If you have a cyber breach, there almost certainly will be a compromise of personal data because it's such a easily saleable asset. If there is a data breach, there almost certainly has been a cyber breach that made it possible. So you can't think of cybersecurity without also thinking about data protection. You can't think about how do you protect the organization from cyber breaches in an environment where the certainty of being breached is up there with death and taxes, without also thinking about the fact that's likely to lead to a data breach, which may or may not have to be reported, but certainly has potential consequences for the organization. And if you look at the newspaper on virtually any day, you will see evidence of ongoing data breaches, whether it's the Alibaba data breach back in July, 18 months ago, 1.1 billion users affected in a single breach. The ongoing MOVEit hack, which has been running since May last year, has so far impacted over 1,000 organizations and 60 million individuals. So how do you deal with information security at the same time as managing personal information effectively? And the answer is that if you've already come across ISO 27001, you should be thinking simultaneously about ISO 27701. ISO 27701, when tackled in conjunction with 27001, can enable you to deal with general information security while safeguarding specifically personal data. ISO 27701, which was published in 2019, is effectively a privacy extension to the International Information Security Management Standard. By privacy extension, what that means is you can't get certification to 27701 on its own, on a standalone basis. You can only get it by virtue of including it in the scope of an ISO 27001 management system. So typically an organization that has 27701 in the scope statement of its 27001 management system certificate, it will say including ISO 27701 2019. What 27701 does is specify the requirements for and provides guidance for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving that PIMS, and it's based on, because it's an extension, it's based on the requirements, control objectives, and controls of ISO 27001. While it says in many areas, simply add the word "and privacy" to the statement in your ISMS, it also adds in a number of additional very specific privacy-specific requirements, controls, and control objectives. How do they integrate? How do you go about tackling the two standards together? ISO 27001, as I said, establishes the requirements for information security management system, taking a risk-based approach to security. By definition, it covers people, processes, and technology. By definition, clause 4.2 requires you to identify the interests and requirements of relevant parties, and those would include data protection regulations. Clause 4.1 requires you to identify internal and external factors that affect information security. By definition, that includes protecting personal data and the likelihood of attacks by cyber criminals who want to steal personal data. So when you're tackling ISO 27001, you are already dealing with the need to protect personal data. 27701 simply goes a bit further than leaving you to work it out. It gives you a set of identified improvements to your documentation and an identified set of additional controls which help you demonstrate compliance with data protection laws like GDPR or in the United States state level privacy laws. And whether you're talking about protecting personal data or personally identifiable information, it's virtually the same type of data, but that combination of standards implemented together as a single implementation project can give you a significant advance. And for many organizations who are ISO 27001-2013 compliant and looking at moving to the new version of the standard 2022, the logical point to introduce 27701 is at the point you're preparing your transition to the new version of 27001, so that you don't just certify to the new standard, you certify to an enhanced new standard. How do you do that? Well, 27001, which has, as you remember, at Annex A, a list of all of the controls whose implementation guidance is included in ISO 27002. Those two standards have both been updated to 2022, but 27701 is still the 2019 version. In other words, it hasn't yet been updated to map to the existing 27001 standard. There was a draft published in early January 2023. It's going through a long ballot stage. There will be some time before a new version is finalized and published. But in the meantime, the fact is that the mapping in ISO 27002, which links both versions of 27002, gives you the opportunity to very straightforwardly map 27001 clauses into the 2022 standard. So just a little bit of extra work or a platform that does it for you. It's very easy to align the statements and clauses in 27701 with the updated 2022 standard. So it's very easy to get yourself to the point where what you're doing is an integrated implementation. You could think of it as building an ISMS with added privacy. So 27701, because it's an extension, looks at the same clauses 4 through 10 that 27701 does, and simply says make a couple of changes to the wording in clause 4, a few other changes in clause 5, and so on, all the way through those 10 standards, those 10 clauses, effectively saying add privacy to each one of the requirements. But there is a number of other more specific areas where it talks about some of the legal aspects of particularly GDPR compliance, but is written broadly enough so that it can extend to apply to other privacy regimes. There are a number of real benefits to implementing 27701, in other words, putting a PIMS into your ISMS. The first is that it gives you a comprehensive privacy framework. So, one of the outcomes or one of the impacts of a breach is, particularly if it's a serious breach, is you find yourself explaining to, in the UK, the ICO, whether or not you took appropriate steps to protect personal data. Saying I've got ISO 27001 is a good way of demonstrating that you did something about cybersecurity. It doesn't necessarily mean that you paid sufficient attention to the personal information management. If you have ISO 27701 included in your management system, then you're able to say actually very clearly what we've got here is a management system which is designed to deal with personal data. So the legal and regulatory compliance, the benefits of third-party assurance and risk reduction, all of those come to your GDPR protection strategy. You would expect to find improvements in the way you manage personal data, the mapping of personal data flows, the ability to demonstrate GDPR compliance can make your RFP processes even more slick and efficient than they might be. And of course, independent insurance on your security and privacy management can provide to your customers, as well as to your staff management and other stakeholders, a level of assurance about the extent to which you deal effectively with personal information through your management system. So in alignment with 27001, how does a PIMS help you take things forward? How do you take it forward? How do you plan for a combined implementation? And the answer is that you're going to do pretty much what you would have done without 27701. So you're going to make sure top management understands the benefits and business value of having a combined management system. You're going to educate them on the business benefits of tackling both at the same time. You're going to clearly communicate the risks of privacy non-compliance and the potential impacts on the organization of a breach. Remember, we live in an environment where breaches are certain. There is no way you can build protection that means you're not going to be breached. You're going to be breached. You're going to have staff make errors. There is a growing number of fines being levied on organizations, not because they suffered a cybersecurity breach by e-criminals, but because somebody inside the organization got confused about which email addresses they could put in the CC as distinct from the BCC line of an email and communicated sensitive personal information to a lot of people who shouldn't have cited the information. That has led to a growing number of fines. So it's not just breaches by criminals that you have to worry about, it's errors, it's the human error issue. So dealing with that risk is a key part of demonstrating when something goes wrong that you did take appropriate steps. Evidence of industry best practice to customers and third parties, emphasizing the role of senior management in driving a security-focused culture and highlighting the competitive advantage gained from implementing them together. Those are the key steps in convincing a management team that implementing a PIMS at the same time is logical. And having got management on board, your process is straightforward. It's conduct a gap analysis. In other words, what are the things that you're doing that already meet the requirements of the combined standards? What are the things you're not doing that you need to change? So gap analysis gives you an action plan. Look at your current security and privacy posture, look at vulnerabilities and non-compliances. Those lead into the specific way you go about addressing the action plan, making sure that you can meet the nuances of the applicable legal and contractual requirements, because there will be cases where you need to be able to go, this customer requires specifically this way of dealing with personal data. You'll want to build that into your processes. You want to look at the scope of your management system, taking account not just of which assets are at risk, but also which departments and business units are protecting personal data. So it's entirely possible that you could find yourself with personal data being processed in applications that you hadn't thought of as being necessary to include in your ISMS because you hadn't realized the application itself, being a web application, was processing data in a different country. So a PIM scope might require you to cast your net slightly more widely than an ISMS scope does. As you would anyway, define the project's timeline, milestones, and desired outcomes. Involve key stakeholders, including senior management department heads, particularly HR, sales and marketing, IT teams, legal and compliance personnel. Think about all of those people who need to be involved in your ISMS. Collaborate with stakeholders to gather input, address concerns, leverage their expertise to identify critical assets, systems, and personal data assets that require protection. ISO 27701 goes a bit further than simply providing controls. It gives you links to 3 other standards that can provide additional information that you could incorporate into your ISMS. So 29100 is a privacy framework, 29151 is a code of practice for PII, and 27018 is a code of practice for PII in public clouds acting as PII processors. And more organizations are using public clouds, and so looking for suppliers who certainly have 27018 in the scope of their ISO 27001 management system makes sense. But you can look for additional guidance on how you go about implementing those controls. And as you expand your activity around 27701, you can also look increasingly at what your suppliers are doing, both processors and controllers, in terms of how they're managing personal data, how they can alleviate some of the concerns you might have about exposures you are facing because of the way in which third parties are managing personal data that you have provided. So that combination of standards helps you meet GDPR and other privacy requirements, shows you the necessary security measures in place to protect personal data and uphold data subjects' rights. Article 42 of the GDPR is the article which talks about the provision of data certification mechanisms and data protection seals and marks, and Europrivacy is the first such mark which has appeared for organizations which have DPOs. You can now get a certification that specifically says you are GDPR compliant, and ISO 27001, 27701 both contribute to doing that. So think about independently accredited certification to 27001. By extension, that includes 27701 if you implement its controls, and that means that you can demonstrate to customers, third parties, stakeholders, what a good job that you're doing. So information security management system plus privacy management integration leads to a combined audit, an integrated audit, a combined certification, which is driven by management committed from understanding what the logic of what it's doing is, building an ISMS that delivers requirements of customers and stakeholders with continual improvement, delivering on information security and privacy objectives to mitigate business risks, goes through the normal process. Internal audits, your internal audit would cover both ISMS and PIMS simultaneously. You don't have two different audits. Your certification process is the normal stage 1 and stage 2 if you're doing it for the first time. So stage 1, looking at your documentation. Stage 2, an audit by the accredited certification body looking for compliance both with the standards and your management system. And of course, that then leads to certification and then continual annual assessment visits or checkups, if you like, to make sure that over the 3-year period of your certification, you're continuing to manage the implementation, manage your combined ISMS and PIMS effectively. So it's quite a straightforward process. I'm just going to talk very briefly about some of the current and future privacy requirements that you might think about. So one of the challenges for some last couple of years has been, how do you deal with processing data in the United States if you are a UK or EU organization? The reality is the United States does not meet the EU's adequacy requirements in terms of data protection, which means there is no legal way in which you can process data in the United States. However, the arrival of the Transatlantic Data Privacy Framework changes that. The TADPF replaces the undermined Privacy Shield. It provides a legal basis for data transfers between the UK, the EU, and Switzerland, and the USA. Basically requires US organizations to self-certify with the EU Department of Commerce. There are a couple of other things they have to do to meet EU legal equivalence requirements. And we suspect that there will be legal challenges. It's not clear yet what those legal challenges will be or when they will appear, but we expect that the same organizations that challenged the Privacy Shield and the previous Data Privacy Framework will challenge the Transatlantic Data Privacy Framework. But in the meantime, until that happens, until there is a judgment, this is a much more robust framework than its predecessors. And as I said, it provides a legal basis on which you can transfer personal data from the EU, the UK, or Switzerland to the US. You can appoint a data processor in the US who processes data for you there. So that's the first significant shift since UK GDPR. The other significant shift in the UK is the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, which was introduced well over a year ago, made some progress, and was then cancelled in the autumn about a year ago. It was resurrected a short while back. It's now passed its second reading in the Commons and started the Lords Committee stage on the 20th of March of this year. There are multiple amendments proposed. The early reading of the law, which has got through its second reading, suggests there are not really fundamental changes to UK GDPR. The Data Protection Digital Information Bill will still be called UK GDPR, for instance. And one of the reasons for that is that the UK has a very sensible recognition that retaining the adequacy recognition by the EU is a clear thing that eases trade or digital trade between the UK and the EU. It's not clear at the moment when or if it will proceed through the process and become law. The point the Prime Minister calls a general election is the point at which there is a wrap-up. If things haven't become law, then they all fall over. So while the Prime Minister has said there will not be a May election, if there were to be, I think the chances of the DIB getting through is roughly zero at that point. If the election is the back end of this year, it may well get through. So it's a potential change. As I said, it doesn't sound as though at the moment it will have very significant changes to the way organizations go about handling digital information. The mood music around the bill is saying it's designed to make it easier for organizations to manage personal information in a commercial environment where technology has moved on very substantially. But as I said, the key thing is to wait and see what happens. When it happens, you will need to pay attention to what the transition arrangements look like, and you'll need to update whatever your GDPR implementation looks like to bring it into line with the new legislation. And that kind of leads into the how do you seamlessly integrate ISO 27001 and UK GDPR into your day-to-day environments. And one logical way to do that is that if you don't yet have ISO 27701 is to make sure that GDPR is included in internal audits and management reviews. Given that a cyber breach is a data breach, given that cyber criminals are focused on stealing and compromising personal data, talking about GDPR, talking about the consequences of personal data breaches, talking about compliance as part of an information security management system, making sure it's addressed in internal audits, making sure it's addressed in management reviews, making sure your external auditors have it in their scope when they come to audit ISO 27001. There's very good ways of ensuring that GDPR is part of how you deal with data protection on a day-to-day basis. The second is to recognize that you need to go beyond the tech stack. If you're going to deal with personal data, you can deal with GDPR compliance, you can't simply rely on having technology in place that will deal with that. And that's true of cybersecurity as much as it is of personal data. So you need to develop controls which work effectively across people, process, and technology. So if, for instance, you have a firewall, that's technology, it's designed to protect the network, it needs to be configured. So you need somebody who understands how to configure the technology you've got. That's a person who has been trained, and you need a process that determines what acceptable risk looks like for the organization, and therefore how the firewall should be configured so that some information is able to get in even if other information is not. So you need to have a balanced approach to how you tackle information security. And ISO 27001 does that. ISO 27002, which identifies its nearly 100 controls by a number of different attributes, includes identifying whether they fall into the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover categories. And that helps you build cyber defense in depth. The controls are also linked very clearly to whether they support confidentiality, integrity, or availability. And again, that means you can use ISO 27002 to map to how you're dealing with CINA as well as building cyber defense in depth. So linking those then to a PIMS mean that you can genuinely build a cyber defense in depth strategy that recognizes cyber and privacy risks as being different sides of the same coin, and which does genuinely help maintain, preserve the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all information, including personal data. And this is a challenging thing to do because we're increasingly talking about complex systems with ongoing changes, and usually you're looking at 27001 and you're looking at GDPR in an environment which involves many other frameworks and standards. And CyberComply is one route to dealing with that. CyberComply is a cloud-based ISMS platform that's designed to give organizations everything they need to build and maintain an integrated ISO and GDPR compliant management system, and to do that out of the box with no room for error and lots of time saving. So CyberComply is a platform that enables you to access a very wide range of frameworks and standards which are linked to the IT governance complete solution of training, consultancy services, compliance activity, which are linked into a cyber defense in-depth approach across the broad range of standards and frameworks that you might need to tackle. From our point of view, we think it's increasingly impossible for organizations to genuinely meet today's compliance requirements without doing that on an appropriate platform that automates and simplifies, and which is capable of being updated centrally when laws change and regulations change, that's capable of doing the crosswalks of standards and frameworks for you. And that's where CyberComply, for the three standards or frameworks I've been talking about, 27001, 27701, and GDPR, comes in, because it crosswalks them. It maps Annex A to multiple frameworks. It handles GDPR components like data protection impact assessments, data subject access requests. It handles the range of compliance requirements. It does a risk assessment. It looks at data protection risk assessments. It can deal with incident tracking. All of that in an automated way. It can save considerable time, reduce error, and reduce cost. Comes with a risk assessment wizard. It automatically produces statements of applicability and risk treatment plans that are able to work across multiple standards and frameworks. Out of the box, it produces all of the mandatory and discretionary information. You can kind of see the, for instance, an access control policy under ISO 27001:2022 there. And it's got a functionality that enables you from within CyberComply to give tasks to everybody inside the organization. Everybody else can have licenses which come free because they're simply a way of enabling you to manage your life efficiently. And a customizable dashboard that enables you and senior management to see exactly where you are in terms of compliance at any one time. What makes CyberComply such a smart choice? J.R. Ricks and Son said that one of the standout benefits was that it saved them between £40,000 and £80,000. They would otherwise have had to spend extra staff, and their information security operations run 75% faster than they would have without CyberComply. So it's a smart choice in terms of making life easier out of the box. It does everything that you need. It's a platform where it's a single price. You get everything for that single price, and that single price is, especially because of the launch runway it's on, discounted for clients who contract before the 31st of March 2024. So it's worthwhile once you have these slides to go to IT governance and have a look at the CyberComply product. Customers apparently think it's an outstanding tool. There are a number of well-known brands that already use the platform, and the kind of don't risk it cyber compliant approach is the one which is driving organizations to look at how they can integrate both privacy and information security into a single cost-effectively managed cyber security risk management system. So how can IT governance help? As I said at the beginning, we help organizations get ISO 27001 certified. We help them transition with the global authority on ISO 27001. We have everything that you need to implement an ISMS. So you don't need to go anywhere else. We can look after training, we can look after consultancy, we can look after management support. All of those components to what you need to do, we can help with. We can implement in a very fast period through fast track. We can help you implement an ISMS, which for a typical maybe 500 employee organization has you ready for certification in between 2 and 3 months, where you don't even have to do any of the heavy lifting. Worthwhile finding out how fast track can work. But we have everything else that you might also need, from training from the ISO original standards themselves through to books, tools, software, staff awareness training, and so on. All of those products, they're available through our website, so you can do it yourself. You can get a bit of help, you can get a lot of help, you can get whatever mix of products and services will help you advance your information security and privacy management objectives in a way that works effectively for you as an organization. And that pretty well brings me to the end of our prepared comments, ladies and gentlemen. So we are ready to take questions. If you remember, there is a Q&A section on the GoToWebinar panel. If you would like to go to that, type any questions you have in there. Type in any questions you have in there, and then either Tom or I will do the best we can to answer those questions. So go to webinar in your chat panel, any questions you like on the whole subject matter of ISO 27001, 27701, implementation issues in and around that transition, either specifically to the subject matter of the webinar or matters related to that. We're very happy to hear from you and to answer questions. Tom, perhaps while we're giving people a chance to see if there are questions they want to ask, you might like to briefly talk about the PJR approach to tackling integrated 27001, 27701 audits. That might be an interesting brief topic to talk to.
Most definitely. I think it's a very common question in regards to people also think all the time when adding additional standards, it's obviously getting more audit time. For them who don't know, obviously the IAF MD5 table is ultimately what all UCAS certification bodies work by, and that goes in effect of employee counts and employee counts of personnel. I think what's key is there's also the MD11 table, and within that is something called a case of information reduction. So what that means is if you've got 27001 and you add in 27701, which is mandatory, you can't implement that on standalone documents, it actually reduces your audit time for both standards by 20%. So a very common question we get in the field as a case of is, as mentioned before, every standard has to go through stage 1 and 2. Therefore, what we try to do is align them on the same audit schedule so both standards are audited at the same time. But ultimately, I'm sure there's many organisations on it at the minute have 27001 that are maybe thinking working towards 27701. That's not an issue. It's just an extension to scope where we add the standard in, and in fact, it will also reduce your 27001 audit. And that's really keen to share. That automatically with any standards now, so that you integrate, you automatically get a 20% reduction on both standards. So very common question. And I think most definitely our approach at PJR regarding our culture is we come in to find conformance and not non-conformance. I think that's really important to share. What that means as well, if we can give opportunity for improvement, we can do. But yeah, a real common question. People think adding standards, adding more time, whereas in fact, the actual more standards that you integrate together, the actual reduction is bigger than the audit time.
So thank you, Tom. The first question, we are ISO 27001 2013 currently. Adding additional standards would be of value, but I was planning on upgrading 2013 to 2022 next year in 2025. However, does this need to be enabled sooner? And my answer would be that there are 60,000 companies that have an ISO 27001 2013 certification. Most of them appear to be waiting until 2025 to do their upgrade, and that means there are going to be a lot of companies who are not going to be able to upgrade because there are only so many certification auditors available, and there are only so many days available in the year, And if everybody tries to get their recertification done in the last 6 months of 2025, well, it's by the 31st of October 2025, there are simply going to be a lot of people who are upset. So I would say, apart from what value you might get from adding standards sooner, it just makes practical sense to avoid the crush of the last 3 to 6 months. Tom, you see this very specifically from an audit perspective.
I think we're recommending clients in respect of is on the cycle of certification due to that time. Therefore, I think what's key for everyone to know the back end of what happens in certification is something called EC review. And what happens as a case of it is we always get people in normally 3-6 months before the cert ends or before the transition date comes. And the reason for that is for the people who don't know, the auditor who carries out your audit and has to go to a panel at the back that's called EC review. And very much where we're feeling is when that pot gets bigger and bigger and bigger, if your EC review doesn't go in time, that will lapse in certification. So couldn't agree more, Alan. As soon as most definitely the better. We've had clients at recertification going flash into this, we're doing it already. For I think waiting till the final deadline is not the best choice, not because of order availability, but also the EC review that sits in the back end.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. With a global company with a headquarter in the US and another operation office in the UK, does an ISO 27001 certificate require to be implemented in both countries, or would in the US only cover all the company's regions? And the answer is it does depend. So to give you one example, we are a business with a headquarter in the UK. We have separate companies in the US and in the EU. We have a single ISO 27001 certificate which covers all of our operations globally and all of our companies globally. But that's because we run a single information security management system. We have 27701 in the scope. We run a single information security management system under control of a single management from the UK, and we apply it across all of our operations. And that's really the key issue. If you have a single information security management system and you apply it across the whole of the business, then you should be getting a single certificate for a single ISMS. You should talk to your certification body, and I would expect they would have absolutely no problem with agreeing to that as a certification strategy. Tom, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think it's spot on. The key thing is it's one centralised system across all countries. What's key that comes from Newcastle certification body wise is your certificate in theory can only display one address on the front cover, and that's the HQ. Any further addresses in different locations, it sits under the group of one, basically the second page, which is Appendix A, will sit there and list the locations. So what's really key and for you to understand is you can only have one central address on your front certificate, therefore the back page will be split letter, and that's what that.
Yeah, and of course there are ways in which you can write the scope so it's crystal clear to companies in every single region that you do operations in that the ISO 27001 certificate applies to them. So that's the answer to that. By when to implement ISO 27701 as the new version is about to be released. And I would say from 20 years of experience of the ISO world, don't depend on the date that somebody's told you for the release of a new standard. Don't depend even on the last draft standard as being the final version, because dates change, the final versions get rewritten. I would simply decide, if you decided that you see a window for where you want to certify and include 27701 in there, include it. I'm not expecting any radical changes to 27701 as a standard. I expect it to map better to the 2022 versions of the core standards. But if it suddenly appears, there will be a transition period. You won't be expected to comply at once. So you could, even after it has been published, simply certify, including 27701 2019 in your scope, and then at your next surveillance visit or your next recertification, at that point make the transition to the new standard. So I'd focus on where the business benefit is rather than letting yourself be held back by the possible date of release of a new version of the standard. Tom, anything you'd like to?
No, perfect. I think no, nothing to add there on, spot on.
And that kind of feels, ladies and gentlemen, as though we're coming to the end of questions. And in the absence of any more questions, I'd just like to thank Tom for joining us on the call. I'd like to thank you all for being with us today. I hope it has been a useful session for everybody. We are running webinars on a regular basis around 27001 and related standards. Please do feel free to come on any more of them. And of course, if you need any information from us, please do feel free to go to any one of our websites, or if you're looking for certification information, directly to the Perry Johnson website. You can get us IT governance in the UK, Europe, or US through our websites or social media in all of those areas. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon, and I hope you all have a secure rest of this week. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Well.